So this week's Torah portion is the portion of Teruma. And in sequence, we have the story, the narrative continues, so we have the story begins in Shemais, begins with the people, the nation of Israel that are enslaved in Egypt, and then there's the story of the plagues and the exodus from Egypt, and they finally receive the Torah in Parshas Yisro, which is 2 weeks ago, and last week was the civil contract, the laws of Mishkan, the civil laws, and now Terumah deals with the building of the Tabernacle, the Mishkan, in the desert. So we're going to try to understand this from two perspectives. Let's use first Rashi's understanding, which is the classic way of understanding it, and then we'll go to the Ramban and his understanding. So when we read this sequence, there are two ways how to read this. One is that it's actually in sequence, the way it's written. So the story is that they finally, we'll talk about receiving the Torah. They receive the Torah, and they receive the Torah, and then right following the receiving of the Torah, they're told about building the Mishkan, building the Tabernacle in the desert. And following that is the story of the golden calf. And after the golden calf, that's when they actually build a Mishkan, which is actually the opinion of the Tsar, which means that there's an argument. And the other opinion says that first was the story of the golden calf, and after the golden calf, so it's not in sequence, after the receiving of the Torah, which is on the 7th day of Sivan, 40 days later, which is the 17th day of Tammuz, Moshe comes down from the mountain and he sees that they created a calf. He breaks the tablets, and they only start, so that's the 17th day of Sivan. Then there's another middle 40 days, and then there's another 40 days. It's 120 days after the 7th of Sivan, which is the 10th day of Tishrei. So when did they start building the Mishkan is the day after Yom Kippur. 10th day of Tishrei is Yom Kippur. Okay, you're following the sequence. So one opinion says that we actually follow the sequence the way it's written. That's the regiving of the Torah, and then the Mishkan, and then the story of the golden calf. And the other opinion says no, first the golden calf, and then the story of the Mishkan. So let's understand these two opinions are very important. The opinion that says that it's out of sequence says like this. This is important. They experienced Matan Torah, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. When the Torah was given, they experienced that I am Hashem, your God. They experienced absolute monotheism. What is absolute monotheism? What does it actually mean? It means that there's only one, only Hashem. Now, therefore, because there's only one, how do we connect to the only one? What's the tools that we have to connect? So if we look at the end of Yisro, the Torah describes and says, don't build for me an altar of gold, don't build for me an altar of silver, Mizbach ha'amatasli, this is an altar of earth, any place that you call my name, I'll come and bless you, which means wherever there's earth to be found, which means any place in the planet, put together a few pieces of stones and connect with me because I'm there. Where am I? I'm everywhere. If I'm transcendent, if Hashem is speaking and saying, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am God, and I'm the infinite one, the transcendent of everything, therefore I'm manifest in everything and everyone and any time. We don't actually need any types of tools, forms. Now if there wouldn't be the story of the golden calf, then we would have the Torah, but it would be on a spiritual plane. We wouldn't need it the way we have it now. This would be one interpretation. So what happens? The people have this very spiritual high experience. They receive the Torah, and they receive the clear awareness and the experiences awareness of the transcendence that's imminent at every moment. They experience this in a way that they actually even transcend their own physical material selves. They leave their bodies, according to Midrashic image. They have this really intense mystical experience.
They what with the bodies?
They leave their bodies. They have an out-of-body experience.
They
leave their bodies, have this out-of-body experience, and they receive the Torah. Okay, now, comes along a few days later, 39 days later, and they go ahead and they build a golden calf. Now, what's the intention of the golden calf? if you read very clearly the description of what they asked for when they built the golden calf, is they don't say, let's make a god. They say, Va'ish Moshe now, the person Moshe is no longer, because Moshe ascended onto the mountain. We can't see him, so let's make us an image that will go in front of us and lead us. So we want, essentially what they're asking for is to create an image, a form, that allows them to connect with the formless. So they said, in an abstraction, in a theoretical universe, yes, we don't need these tools, we don't need any form, we don't need actually details, and any moment can be a spiritual moment, any moment can be a connection to Hashem. However, we're real people in real time, we need an image. So they say, we're going to create this image, and it's not going to be an idol, we're not going to serve it, we're just going to use it as a tool, as a launching pad to get to something that's beyond it. So we use this form to get to something that's beyond the form. This is what they dedicate the golden calf. What actually happens is that the next morning they say, Ay Elokech Yisrael, this is the God of Israel. Which means that they go from looking at the calf, at the golden calf, as just a medium to get an access point from something that's formed to get to the formless, from something that's immediate, something that's tangible to get the intangible. They all of a sudden transform and say, no, this is actually the intangible thing is the God that took us out of Egypt. Okay. Moshe comes down from the mountain, and he's holding the two tablets, the two luchos. He looks at the narrative, he sees what's happening, he sees what the people have done. So what does he do? He takes the luchos, and he breaks them. Now the reason why he breaks them on a very deep level is not just out of anger, but he's really doing something that's very intentional. He's saying, if the people are connecting to form, and they're connecting to a calf, if I'm going to bring them something from heaven, they're going to start worshiping the luchos. So he takes the luchos and he breaks them. He breaks the tablets. There shouldn't be any type of form. Now, if you look even on in the actual conversation that Hashem has with Moshe on top of the mountain, it says, "Lech reid kishichas amcha," go down, descend from the mountain, because your people have descended, have been corrupted, leading a corrupted way. Kishichas amcha. Kishichas amcha means that your people have been corrupted. Hashem tells Moshe, it's your people. Why is it your people? Hashem took them out of Egypt, all of a sudden he calls them your people. So the deeper interpretation is Hashem tells Moshe that maybe the reason why these people didn't get the idea of the giving of the Torah on the highest level is because it's your people. Because you allowed them, maybe it's a reflection of you, maybe you allowed them too much hero worship, and they thought that Kishichas Amcha, that you took them out of Egypt. And they said Moshe took us out of Egypt, and now we need someone in place of Moshe. Kishichas Amcha, maybe this is a problem in your leadership. So Moshe also has to demote himself. Lech shichas kishichas amcha, lech reid, you have to demote yourself, and now you have to have a new relationship with the people. But the end result of this whole episode is Hashem comes to Moshe and says, you know what, Salachti, I've forgiven the people, and now you're going to build for me a Mishkan, a tabernacle. Now what's the intention of the building of the actual Mishkan? The intention of the building of the Mishkan is that we're going to create, and this is why the narrative of the creating of the Mishkan is the longest narrative in the Torah. Terumah, Tetzaveh, Kisisa, Kisaveh, Yaakov, Bikudi, hundreds of verses are dedicated to the building of the Mishkan. The Mishkan is the anti-idol idol, because what the Mishkan is, it's a form, has a particular structure, and Hashem says, this is what I want you to create. I want you to create this structure for me. But the intention of creating this structure is, like anything, of any type of form, is really to connect with something that's beyond the form. So Hashem says, you know what? You created an idol. You created a golden calf. Obviously you need an image, because you want to connect with me. That's originally your desire. Your desire was always to connect with me, but you used this image in order to connect to something that's beyond the image. But it didn't work, because you got caught up with the image, and you started subscribing to the image its own powers, that you didn't look at it any longer as a medium, but you started looking at it as an end, not as a means to ends, but as an ends in itself. So Hashem says, you know what? Make for me a Mishkan. And the truth is, there's no place in heaven big enough to contain God. right? We're talking about something that's infinite. We're not going to contain the infinite in this particular space. But create for yourself a space that you are going to connect. You are going to connect with me. This is a special place that you are going to connect through your own actions, through your own doing, through your own creation. You're going to be able to, through your form, you are able to connect with something that's beyond me, beyond the form. How are you going to make this? How are you going to make this Mishkan? So Hashem tells Moshe that I want you to tell the people that they have to make this Mishkan. It's not just a general structure, and I'm telling them, make the Mishkan. Just build a building, there are 3 rooms and that's it. But make the Mishkan in a very specific way. I want it to have a courtyard, an inner chamber, and an inner chamber. It should be very particular what type of wood is used and what type of gold is used and how much gold and which silver. Everything is details and details and details and details. Why the hundreds, thousands of details in constructing this form? Hashem could just say, build me a sanctuary, a nice temple, and you'll connect with me from this place of form to the place that's beyond form. Just create for me a sanctuary. Why the details, exactly what the color paint should be, and what the floor should be made of, what the wall should be made of, and how much exactly each measurement should be? And the answer is, because the more details there are, the more there's the recognition of the people that are building this Mishkan, that it's actually not about them and about the structure, but it's about connecting to someone that's telling them to create the structure. If I tell you, I want you to build me a home, I don't really care how it looks. Just build me a beautiful home. You're an architect. I give you full rights. Let's build a home with your hand. Okay, so then you get into your creativity and you make the home. Why are you creating the home? You forgot that I told you to create the home. I just paid you. But if I tell you I want you to create for me a home and I want this amount of rooms and the room should look like this and every single then it violates and it's against what you think the home should look like. But you say, you know what, this is what the owner wants. So this is exactly what I'm doing. But this is the owner wants. So the more details you have, the more you're remembering the person that told you about the details to create it. And the same is also with the Mishkan. All the details of the Mishkan, and that's why there's the most details in the creation of the Mishkan, is to tell us that, yes, Hashem says you want to create form, you need some type of image in order to connect with me, which is the imageless, which is the infinite. You need some type of finite form. Go ahead, create the form, but create it in the way I want it to be done. This is exactly the structure with all the buildings, plans, and exactly the layout and all the details. So we're creating an image, a type of form. We're even creating keruvim, like in the inner chamber of the temple. What you're actually doing is almost creating what would look like to be idols. You're creating little images of people or angels, winged angels that are looking at each other, which seems to be an idol. But they're so detailed that you'll never mistake and say, okay, that's exactly the idol. Therefore, it's God. We worship this. But it's always about, this is the space in between the keruvim. In that empty space, that's where we're connecting with Hashem. So it's always about using the image to get beyond the image. This is one way of looking at the narrative. And looking at the narrative this way, it's actually out of sequence. Because what happens is, first there's the receiving of the Torah, then there's the story of the golden calf, and then there's the story of the Mishkan. But if you actually look in the Torah, it's not written this way. The Torah is written as first the going out of Egypt, then the receiving of the Torah, then the Mishkan, and then the golden calf, and then the building of the Mishkan. So the Zohar says that the instructions to build a Mishkan occurs before the golden calf, and the Ramban also says that not only was the instructions to build a Mishkan, but actually the creation of the Mishkan. So according to the Ramban, which is Nachmanides, which is another way of looking at this, the intention of the Mishkan was not a concession to the weakness of man. It wasn't because we weren't able to have access to any place that you call me, I'll connect with you. Don't make me fancy altars of gold or altars of silver. I just need a piece of earth and connect with me because we weren't in that place. Okay, so that's why we need the Mishkan. And think about also in terms of our own life, that the reason why we need all the details of mitzvahs is because we can't celebrate everything of life as a mitzvah, so we need a specific thing. The reason why we need Shabbos as a specific day in the week is because we don't know how to live Shabbos every day, because we don't know what it means to have Kedusha, holiness in every moment. And when we will, every day will be Shabbos. So it's like a concession that we only have one day of Shabbos, really every day should be Shabbos. Right? So we're signaling out one thing in order to go beyond it. According to the other way of reading it, it's the opposite. It's not a concession, it's actually a continuation. We experience Sinai on the highest level. Absolute oneness of Hashem. But that experience that we had was purely on a transcendent level. What we needed to do, and this is why the Mishkan comes right after Sinai, before even the golden calf. What we need to do is we need to recreate the experience that we had on Sinai into something that we can actually move with us. Something that becomes tangible, to take the spiritual experience that we had that was outside the body, outside of time, almost outside of space, in a desert, in a wasteland, and try to take that experience and recreate it into real time. So what we're doing is, and this is what some of the verses speak about when Moshe was making the Mishkan, it says, like everything that I've shown you on the mountain, which means you've seen it on Sinai, and now Hashem is saying, I want you to recreate the experience of Sinai, what we all collectively saw, create it into real time. So we had the experience of seeing the Kavod Hashem, the glory of Hashem. Now make the glory of Hashem present in this building. And according to the Ramban and the deeper Kabbalistic readings of that, that's why the Mishkan is actually divided into three basic rooms. There's the outer room, which is the Azara. Then there's inside there is the Kodesh, the holy, and inside is the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. So in the outer court, that's the place where there is the Mizbeach HaChitzon, the outer altar. In the Kodesh, in the holy, that's the place where there's the menorah, where they lit the candles. That's the place of the incense. That's the place of the showbread, of the lechem hapanim. That's the place where most of the functionality of the Mishkan occurred there. And then in the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which was behind the curtain, behind the wall, was the place where they kept the Ar and the Ark. Okay, so you have the division of these three. You have the outer court, which is connected with animal sacrifices, the altar, which brought animal sacrifices. Then you have the inner court, which is connected where the priests would sing the songs, and they would light the menorah, and they would bring incense and the bread. And then the inside, the inner chamber, which is the Holy of Holies, which was a place that only the high priest entered on Yom Kippur once a year. So you actually have these three divisions.
And what was inside this third one?
The ark.
What's the ark?
The ark, the Orim, with the tablet, with the kruvim, with the cherubs, the kruvim, and inside was the luchos, the full luchos, and the second set of luchos, and the broken luchos were also inside there. So that was in the inner chamber. According to the deeper reading that we're saying, that it's not a concession, right? It's not that because we're weak and our minds are feeble and we can't grasp the infinite and we need to create form. That's why we created form. That's why we created the golden calf. And therefore, because we created the golden calf, Hashem says, okay, so you need an image, so create for me an image, but do it in my way and do it with my details, so you remember that it's me that you're connecting with. This is a different perspective. Which we're saying is the idea of the Mishkan is to recreate Sinai in a very tangible way. How do we recreate spiritual experiences in a tangible way? So if we look at the three basic divisions of the Mishkan, this is what Nachmanides and his students speak about, Rabbeinu Bechai, the divisions of these three stages, of these three compartments, correspond actually to the three inner worlds that we perceived. Because we spoke about this a few weeks ago. There's the world of Asiya, which is the physical material world. Right? That's the most outer world. That's the world that we mostly function on. Then there's a higher evolved universe, which again, in the world of Asiya, everything functions in the world of Asiya. A stone, a tree, an animal, and human, everyone's functioning in the world of Asiya. That's the most basic universe, most basic reality. Basic consciousness of reality is Asiya. A more evolved consciousness, which means a higher form of life, is the world of Yitzir, which is the place of emotion. Which is emotion is further movement, because now it's awareness of another, so it's moving outside of itself. That's a higher movement. Then the highest universe of the created reality is the world of, that's Yitzir. That corresponds to Yitzir, is the world of formation. The deeper world is the world of Bria, which is creation, which corresponds to the level of intellect, right? Neshama. So you have Moyach, mind, Lev, heart, Kavod, which is liver. It also corresponds to the three parts of the body. So you're dividing the body into three groups. You have the head, which is the the moach, where the head, the mind is. That corresponds to the neshama. The lev is the torso, that's the heart, the place of the emotions. And then the liver is considered part of the lower part of the body, which is your action. So moach lev kavod also spells the word melech, which is king, which means a master is someone that has a moach lev kavod, that mind controls the heart, that controls the liver. That's the direct, otherwise you're a lamach. You're basically, it doesn't work. So you're going this direction, which corresponds against the three universes, which is Bria, Yetzira, Asir, Moach lev kavod. Correspondingly, when we look at the actual Mishkan, we see the same formation of the Mishkan. The outer courts, the Azara, that corresponds to the world of Asiya. So because that corresponds to the world of Asiya, that's the place that we do physical, very physical actions. What is that? Slaughtering animals, offering animals. This is a very, very engaged, hands-on, graphic place. Blood and whatever goes on when you sweat. It's a very gruesome place. And this is the place of Asiya, and it's very loud and noisy and crazy. That's the world of Asiya. This is the physical, the most tangible, most earthy place of the temple, corresponding to the world the way we see it, the world of Asiya. When you enter into the inner chamber, that's the place of Kodesh, which is the holy. So you're entering into a quieter space. But there's also music being played, and the steps of the Azara, so it's playing, and you can hear music. There's different lights. You're lighting the menorah. You're offering incense, and there's a smell of bread, which this represents a more emotional. The lights and the sounds and the emotions. This represents a more subtle physical reality, but a higher physical reality, which is the place of our emotions. That's the Kodesh corresponding to the world of Yitzira. When you go into the inner chambers, which is the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, that corresponds to the world of Bria, which is Ma'ach, the mind. That's where the place of the Torah. That's where the luchos, the tablets, which is the Torah. That's where it's settled in the inner place. So you go from a very, very loud place to a very, very quiet place, right? The loudest place is the outer court. Inside in the holy is quieter. You don't have live animals, right? So it's a much quieter place. The Holy of Holies is the quietest place because you even enter this once a year. And when you enter there, you just enter with smoke, with kataras. So these actually represent different levels of your consciousness, because the outer extremities of consciousness is the loud part of self, the very noisy part of self, the movement. That's the part that we move, and we're constantly moving forward and backward, and we're constantly moving. Deeper levels of our consciousness are quieter. The deepest level of our consciousness is very, very quiet, very settled. Right? So you go from a very loud place to a quiet place, from a very moving place to a very settled place. That's the inner resources, that's the Holy of Holies, and that's the place that we enter. Symbolically, we enter in the Holy of Holies in Yom Kippur, in our very pristine, high moments. That's a place that only we can enter. No one else can enter that place. We can emotionally show other people, we can physically show other people, but in the deepest way we're thinking that's only for ourselves. So that's the quietest place. This actually, division of three, which we say that's the experience of Sinai, that's being lived out and created in a real space. And we say that also corresponds to the moach lev kavod, which is the mind, the heart, and the kavod, which corresponds. If you take the image of a person, you have the higher part, the middle part, the lower part of the human being. So correspondingly, the Malbim and others talk about how this can also correspond to the different parts of the body. That the outer part of the body, which is from the waist downwards, represents movement and other types of activities that's very animalistic. So that's connected to the world of Asiya. Right? So that's the lower part of the body. That's the kavod. That's the lower part of the body, Asiya. That's the place where there's animal offering. So it's an animal consciousness, so very connected to very brute animal reality. Then there is the more subtle internal reality of the human being, which corresponds to this part of the body, which is the internal organs. And there is the digestive system, which corresponds to the lechem hapanim, and there's the kidneys, and all these the breath and wind. This is all occurring in this part of the body, and the lungs. These correspond to lechem hapanim, to the incense, and to the menorah. And then you go into the highest part of the body, which is the actual mind, the head. In the head itself, you have the two parts of the right and the left hemisphere, which they correspond to the two luchas, which is in the ark. And the ears actually correspond to the kruvim, and this is actually the structure of the body, is the same image of the structure of Sinai. So what we're saying is that there are two ways how to basically say what actually happens in the Parshas Terumah, where we're told to bring the tabernacle. Either we're looking at it from a perspective that because we want to transcend and we want to connect to something that's beyond us, and every moment and any time, we created tools, we created imagery, and therefore Hashem says, okay, it's not going to work, create for me imagery. So the reason why we have, let's try to understand this internally, the reason why we have physical actions of mitzvahs, why we need a specific day to connect, or a specific time in the day to pray, why do we need specific things or specific objects that are kiddusha, that are holy? Because we are people that need form and need imagery. We connect to finite things. Our mind cannot grasp infinity. So therefore, in order to connect to infinity, we use these as tools. But we should never ever forget that these are only tools to connect us to something that's beyond us. We should never worship a pair of tefillin, no matter how holy it is, because the tefillin is only there to connect us to something higher than that. And you can take a pair of tefillin, you can make an avodah zarah, you can make an idol the same way if you worship it, or even a Torah for that matter. It's only there as an access point to something that's beyond and something that's infinite. That's the one way of understanding it. The mitzvah, the form, is there to get us to that which is beyond the form. Then we can think about, that's one way of thinking about the mitzvahs. Another way to think about the mitzvah, which is the actual physical practice. What's the reason why we're practicing this specific thing in a specific time? Another way to think about the practice is that it's not just because we are finite beings and that's the only way we connect, but this is actually the way we take infinity and make it real into real time. The opposite, that the way infinity, which is transcendent, becomes real to us in our lives is when let's say the mitzvah is misyachas alatzmas, so the mitzvah is actually linked up to the essence of the infinite. Even though the mitzvah is form, the infinite is formless, because the way we create in real time connections is through the form, through using specific times, through specific objects. That's the way we're creating maybe the perspective we have on a conscious level, or at least on a theoretical level, of the oneness of Hashem. We're creating in real time, because we live in real time, so we're creating in the place where there's real time and real movement and real, the external, and that's the way we're connecting with it. So this is the two understandings of what the objective of the Mishkan, and when we talk about the Mishkan, it's not just a tabernacle that happened in the desert, but we're talking about a Mishkan, love Mishkan heaven. We have to build our own Mishkan in our own hearts. And if we look at actually the verse which speaks about the building of the Mishkan, it says, build for me a Mishkan, and I will rest amongst you. It doesn't say, and I'll rest in the Mishkan. It says, amongst you, because the intention of the Mishkan is that Hashem should rest within us, not to rest within a building. It's that we, and like the Chinuch says, the point of the Mishkan is that we have a place to connect with Hashem. Hashem is everywhere. So we're using these specific times and specific objects to connect with something that's beyond us. And that's really what the higher intention of the Mishkan is, to create in real time the experience that we have on Sinai, and any experience that you have, any spiritual type of experience, to recreate it in real time.